Good morning, good afternoon, and good day wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of the Digital Download, which
which
is
is the longest
the
running
longest.
weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live, now officially syndicated on the IBGN radio network.
Well done, Adam.
Excellent. You've been practicing.
It's only taken
Good
2
job.
years. 2 years, that's all.
2 years. Well, as it happens, we just celebrated the anniversary of our first broadcast. On April 16th, 2021, we ran our first LinkedIn Live event.
Wow.
Beyond the show, talk about our clubhouse show, Social Selling and Influence. And then on April 30th of 2021, we had our first broadcast using the name The Digital Download.
3 years.
3 full years completed.
Wow.
We're now entering our 4th year of broadcasting. That's exciting.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Pretty
which
cool.
makes us the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live.
It does, doesn't it? Who knew?
Absolutely.
Well, who knew? Everybody knew, actually.
Everybody knew.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So today, we're transforming organizations via career architecture. We have a special guest, Kayvon Turan, to help us with the discussion. With an extensive background in startups, launching and building several, Kayvon now serves as CEO and co-founder of Zal AI, helping organizations re-image their talent management programs. But before we bring Kayvon on, let's go around the set and introduce everyone. While we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience. Audience participation is highly encouraged. Okay, so with that, introductions. Adam, would you kick us off, please?
I'd love to. I must say that I'm very much looking forward to having Taven on the show. I don't care about what he does. You know, I'm meeting him for the first time, and you saw behind him, he's got loads of guitars hanging up. So we're like brothers. Anyway, I'm Adam Gray. I'm co-founder of DLA Ignite, and I'm delighted to be part of the longest-running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live because it's, I think it's an incredible achievement, isn't it? 3 years of doing this.
Absolutely. It's my favorite part of the week. It's that virtual water cooler talk. And that's really what started it. As we were all in lockdown, we were looking for ways to connect with others. And that's what brought us to Clubhouse, which eventually brought us to this platform. And now, even though we're back in person for so many things, there's still a great amount of virtual events taking place. And I like the fact that we're facilitating some of that too. So thank you, Adam. Welcome. Bertrand.
Yeah, I am somehow the newbie on that show. It's only my 4th one. That's why I haven't had time to practice as much as Adam did, and therefore I don't even try. But
you're on the clock. You have 2 years.
Here. I will practice, and sometime soon I will be able to join the first sentence. So my name is Bertrand Godillot. I'm French, based in Toulouse, South France, and I am leading Odysseus & Co., a DLA Ignite partner.
Excellent.
And I'm very glad to be here on Fridays.
Welcome. And myself, I am Rob Durant, founder of Flywheel Results, a proud DLA Ignite partner. And I like to say, I help startups scale. As I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Kayvon Turan, CEO and co-founder of Zal AI. Without further ado, let's bring him on. Kayvon, good morning and welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about you and how you got here?
Yeah, so It's been about 10 plus years of working in early stage technology startups and loving the ability to have autonomy and I guess more say in the direction of a company, given its size and stature, but feeling like there was always something missing when it came to having transparency and structure around growing my career. And it's a tricky thing to strike a balance of, right? Especially when we're talking really early stage companies that are fighting for product market fit and just to stay alive, to then think of their employees. Um, but but it's something that has been really inspiring to me. And I spent the last 5 years working in education technology and seeing, what great education can do to someone in terms of helping them upskill, reskill for their career and the trajectory that that can have for their career path. And so I kind of stumbled across this opportunity and found two amazing co-founders. And we decided to take the plunge together to start Sol AI. So that's a really, really high level of sort of how we got here. And I'm happy to go deeper and talk about all of it.
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have you here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's start with a foundational question. What do you mean when we say career architecture?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's this idea of thinking of, for example, a job description and thinking about the building blocks of that job description and what it means to be sort of requisite with that role. And so when I talk about career architecture, I'm talking about, let's take a job description. Let's parse that out for all the skills and competencies, the building blocks of what will make someone successful in that job. And then let's think about those skills and competencies as it relates to the laddering and the levels within a career path at an organization. And the power of thinking in terms of that and thinking more in terms of like a skills-based organization is not just in terms of how talent management can work, right? By having someone say, look, here are the skills and competencies that I'm really good at, and here are the ones I'm interested in learning, and how do I bridge that gap with learning and development, but also in terms of hiring and making sure that the person that you're hiring isn't just someone who's coming in based off of the title of the job, but actually understands the roles and responsibilities of that position based on the skills that they need to exemplify and express to be successful. And so what I've found is that a lot of the companies that I've worked for struggle to do this. It's hard work. And so, but it's very important work when it comes to actually being able to hire effectively, upskill effectively, retain effectively, engage effectively for your workforce. And so that's what I talk about when I say career architecture.
Excellent. I heard you say a skills-based organization. We have a LinkedIn Learning subscription. Isn't that enough?
Yeah. I've got no disrespect to LinkedIn. I mean, I've got issues with LinkedIn Learning. Look, like I think, and it's funny because I've worked at a number of companies that have given me that line, Rob, where it's like, oh, you want to become, you're a salesperson and you want to become a senior AE, or you want to become a manager of, like, did you check out LinkedIn Learning? We've got a subscription. It's like, go hunt in the cavern for, go look through the cacophony of noise to figure out which course is relevant for you. And oh, by the way, there's no way of really actually understanding if after you've taken that course, you can now, do the thing that you learned, and your manager doesn't care because they didn't actually watch that. They didn't have any part of picking out what course you should take. And it just all feels kind of like lip service, honestly, when it comes to something like that. That's been my experience. And I think some organizations do a better job of curating large platforms like that. But this is very near and dear to my heart because before I started Zoll, I actually built a lifelong learning platform at my last company that I co-created with the CEO. And we actually set out to solve some of the challenges that we see with things like LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, edX. But that organization was very focused in working directly with universities. What I thought was sort of the big problem to solve is working directly with the organizations, the companies themselves, and almost setting them up to be ready to implement effective learning and development. It's sort of this contextualization layer that's been lacking. The world doesn't need another a Python 101 course. Like, we don't need more content. This isn't Netflix. We need better contextualization. We need better assessment. We need better measurement. And then we'll be able to precisely recommend, diagnose, and use the cacophony of content much more effectively. Things like LinkedIn Learning. So you got me started, Rob. Sorry.
So can I pick up on something that you said there? So that certainly in my experience of, and I've not ever run a large business that has required to hire many people, but from an outsider's perspective, as being hired into organizations and from seeing other people come and go from organizations, the problem often, as I perceive it, is ignorance in the organization. So they have a job description, they've hired somebody based on that job description. It hasn't worked out because they've hired exactly the wrong kind of person. When they fire that person, they then go back to the filing cabinet, they take out the job description that hired the person that was useless, and then they put that out to recruitment consultants, and they hire someone who's exactly the same, that's got all of the same neuroses and problems and stuff. So how do we break that cycle? How do we break the cycle of me as a junior person hiring you as a senior person when I can't possibly comprehend the value that you should be bringing to the organization? How do we remap how organizations choose people, and then how do we make the people fit for purpose?
It's spot on. And it's been the same experiences that I've seen over and over again. And so I think it's a combination of education and people coming together and sort of figuring that out. I can talk about that. As well as I think there's an opportunity for technology to help in regards to this. So in terms of the people coming together and figuring it out, or actually, let me start with the technology. Let's say we can get 70% of the way there by way of all of the job descriptions that are already out there in the world. These are public artifacts, right? So what we're doing is we're ingesting tens and thousands of job descriptions from APIs that are available from job boards. And we can filter those based on industry, based on title. And what we're basically doing is we're averaging them and we're making them as close as possible to an organization like yours to give you an average of here's the skills, competencies, the things that you basically want as building blocks that represent the person that you're looking for. But that, in my opinion, only gets you, let's say, 70% of the way there. And that might even be generous. The rest of that is then how do you bring together a hiring manager, maybe even the colleagues who are on that team, the people who are actually on the ground floor doing the work, maybe one individual in your company who's really, really good at the thing that you want to replicate, and an HR person, and collaborate on that and say, is this the right thing? Is it actually this skill? And what do we mean when we talk about this skill? And what's the expression of that in terms of behavior? And so that's been a process that's also very messy, typically, if it's even done at all. It's like some bad, combination of slides and spreadsheets. And so both of those things are workflows that we've incorporated into how we like to think of career architecture at Zoll, and how we try and help companies go through that process, because the process you described is exactly right. And I just want to add this too, because I think it's really important, and it's a mistake that I've made earlier in my career. It's a great quote. It's this idea that I think a lot of entrepreneurs get caught up in this idea that technology solves problems and they're out there and they're pushing technology. I really subscribe to this idea that technology scales solutions, right? The thing that we're trying to solve for is that, like, when people come together and they're educated in this process and they have the time to dedicate to doing it, and they can wrangle together all the minds in their organization or outside knowledge to get this job done, it can be accomplished. So then the question is, how do we make that easier? And how do we streamline that with technology? And that was one of the things actually that got me really excited, that we have the ability to do this and that we could help a lot of people at sort of the nexus of this problem. Because once you're able to do that, you can hire more effectively, you can train more effectively, you can retain, you can engage, all of the stuff that we love when it comes to great people management. So
I was just making a note of what you said there. Technology doesn't solve problems, it scales solutions. I think that's a magnificent quote, because it absolutely sums up an issue that we are coming up against all the time, which is people think that I'll buy this piece of software and then all of a sudden we'll have pipeline. And actually you won't, because that's not the way the world works. And I guess that when we're looking for simplification and efficiencies in things, we need to have the basic understanding of what the process is that we're trying to improve or to replicate or to scale or whatever. We have to have that very clear and a working model of that before we press the button to go large. Because if you supersize something that's broken, you just end up with a big problem rather than a small one, don't you?
Yeah, that's so well said. Yeah.
So, Kayvon, what are the key components of an effective career architecture framework?
Gosh, such a good question. Yeah, I mean, the truth of that answer is that it can be very different depending on the stage of the organization, the industry that they're in. What I will say is that there's a combination here that I think is really important for organizations to think about. And I think the first thing is, and Adam sort of spoke to this, is the education component of realizing that this is a framework that you should be thinking about when it comes to how you're structuring your organization. That's like probably the first and most important step. I'm writing a blog post right now with one of my co-founders. That's called "Is Ignorance Bliss?" And what we don't know and how that's applied to skill gaps in particular, but it's very applicable here too when we think of the architecture of an organization and how we want to set things up for growth. I think what we've seen is that a lot of companies, as they're cresting over, let's say, 100 employees, that's just like the very bottom of sort of like where this could be applicable for them to start thinking of. And there are organizations that are, for example, like a service-based organization, an agency model with billable hours. It's incredibly important for them to manage their workforce and the time of that workforce, because that's the whole business. And so they might be thinking about these things earlier. But let's say like a organization of 100 people, they're just starting to think about the compliance impact of their organization, its size, and needing to have more structure in terms of talent development, et cetera, hiring practice, et cetera. So for them, that would be a great time to now think of, okay, let's really break down the architecture of our career pathing at our organization. So let's look at all the roles as they relate to one another. Let's think of within a particular career path, just linear, like in a linear sense within one department. Take one job like account executive and how that ratchets up through the levels. What is the bundle of skill and competency that's requisite with each one of those roles? How do they relate to one another? And now let's think about, for the gaps between those roles, what are the things that need to happen? So of course it might be performance goals, but it might also be, things that we must learn. And for the things that we must learn, or for the performance goals, how are we applying our learning and development program to meet that gap for these individuals, so that we're not necessarily helping everyone move up that funnel, because that's not also the goal of every individual, but we're helping all of our employees feel supported and fulfilled in the work that they're doing. And that even if they want to stay, for example, at their current level, that they can continue to get better and better at it, like a little bit at a time. I mean, I think that's what we as humans find valuable in a career. You don't need to be a craftsman to sort of benefit from that like ikigai type of thinking. Like, we just want to feel that we're not, I guess, completely static. We want to feel some dynamic feeling when we're at work. And so, yeah, those are just some ideas laying out some foundation of how we could start thinking about this. And it's surprising that it isn't more commonplace.
But it strikes me that this is a business rather than an individual problem primarily, isn't it? Because most of the companies that I've worked at have promoted people either because the person was potentially going to leave. So you're the top performing salesman, Tavon. So how am I going to reward you because you're at the top of your pay pyramid? Okay, well, I'll make you a sales manager. So I'll take all of the skills that you've developed and demonstrated superiority at, and I'll say you're not going to use those anymore. You're going to manage people that are using those skills. Like how those two are completely divorced from each other. There's no relevancy there. So it's either that, or it's the fact that, oh, I've got a new opportunity for you. I'm going to move you into this department. You can grow into the role. It's like it's just lunacy, isn't it, to expect people to perform well under those circumstances?
You know, that it strikes a thought with me. I had this great conversation with the chief people officer at Zapier. And a program they are really proud of at Zapier culturally is their offboarding program. They invite their employees to tell them if, look, I'm interested in this role. I know that it's not realistic for me to have it at Zapier. And you know what? They support them in helping to find that role. And now all of a sudden, there's transparency in that process. So instead of getting to that last second moment where now let me rush to backfill this person, oh shit, or sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
No, you can say shit on here. It's fine.
Or and you know, you have that moment, or you think, oh, let's just, you know, make them a manager. There's a little bit more transparency in the process that I think you're right. It is an organizational problem. It's a cultural problem. It's that's how we've always kind of done it way. And look, I understand. I'm not like delusioned in thinking that the purpose of HR is in service of the organization, in service of the company. But I think the greater point is that by doing well in this regard, you are actually doing a good service to the company. And you might have to like veer to the left first to go back on course to that mission. But it's a really important veer, because this is, you know, it's the lifeblood of your company is the people. So
what would you say are the biggest challenges, I would say, because everything I fully agree with what you just said, and I think, you know, it's kind of common sense that if you do your work correctly as an HR, then you are serving the company. So what part of change management does that require?
yeah, it's a great question. And you know, change management is one of those things too that, like, going back to like technology, like that's a hard problem to solve with technology. And so I think that that's a combination of like your company, your brand, the content that you're putting out there, the mission behind what you're trying to do. And the nice thing is, I think at the end of the day, this type of change management, there are a lot of professionals in the workplace that understand and value it. That's been my experience. I've spoken to hundreds of L&D leaders, and I'd say by and large, a lot of them are passionate about this idea, because they're doing that role because they want to help people grow. They want to see people find fulfillment, be successful in their work. And so I think the change management, there's a few different people that I think it's tricky to educate this piece on, to really get this to work. One is the managers, and maybe we can hone in on that a little bit. I think a lot of managers don't understand the value of this work, which is ironic because it's to their benefit. Like, and it's weird because I felt this experience myself. So I was, let's say, I was a product manager at my last company. I went to my boss and I sort of said, "Look, I'm interested in becoming a senior product manager." And I would get this hand wavy response of, "Well, you know, you show up and you work hard," and that drove me insane. Because I was like, look, we're investing in LinkedIn Learning. We're investing in coaching. You give me a $2,000 education stipend, but there's no direction on how to use all of these resources to actually demonstrate that I have done those things and that I'm ready for that next step. But what was, I guess, not funny, it gave me pause when I became a manager, and then I had my team members coming up to me asking me the same question. I found myself doing the same thing, because the company hadn't actually taken the time. And look, I'm blaming the company. I blame myself in this process too now, right? But I would go to HR and say, look, I've got a product manager. He's really talented. He wants to become a senior product manager. That's the next rung. He's young and he's hungry, and like, this is what he's focused on, you know. And I don't know what to tell him. What do I tell him? And they're like, well, you know, we haven't really figured it out, and it's really up to you as the manager. So
If you work
this is
really hard and
yeah.
come in on
Yeah, clock in. So there's this alignment that needs to happen with HR, right, and the department managers, and really first laying down this architecture, this infrastructure to enable this type of progression. where on HR side, they don't feel, look, yes, he is talented, but they'll give me some excuse like, well, he's too young. It's like, okay, well, then that sounds like there's some criteria around experience in the role. Is there a 2-year mandatory experience in the role? That's fine, but let's just say it. Like, why why does it have to be off the cuff? Like, it's not
It's
doing
so
the
simple when you say it like
Yeah.
that. It's because you were saying about the kind of, well, you just work really hard and you show up and all of that. I'm reminded of that fantastic meme about where the boss turns up in his brand new Lamborghini and one of his employees says to him, "Oh, fantastic new car, brand new Lamborghini." And the boss says, "Well, if you work really hard the whole year, I'll get another one next year." And it's kind of like completely missing the point of the question, isn't it?
Right. Exactly. So yes. So I think there's a fundamental sort of change management conversation that needs to happen between department managers, who probably honestly, a lot of them are pained at this point because they've dealt with this. They've probably gotten to the point in their career where they got to that point dealing with all of this BS, but they're like, this is kind of how the world works to a certain extent, which is sad because I know a lot of managers also who take a lot of pride in helping their team develop. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of them feel, overworked, like they're too busy working in the job than like helping support their team in some capacity. Or another thing that I see is a lot of managers who are basically like rogue, coming up with these complicated, almost like obfuscation. Like they're coming up with all this structure and things and like, well, you hit this milestone, you hit this milestone, you do this progression, then we can make a case for you. But it's like, yeah, but like, why not establish that with HR so that there's actually some validity to it? Because I've also seen that backfire. And the person does all those things, and then it's like, well, actually, I don't have the
There's no
authority.
job for you.
Yeah, there's no job for you, right? So it's one of those things that you're totally right, Bertrand. There's a big element of change management, but I don't think it's so difficult. That like, it feels solvable. It feels solvable. So.
I heard you reference Zapier and something really out of the ordinary, and it prompted a thought. How can an organization leverage training and development, career pathing, and so on as part of its brand?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Rob. Like, it's surprising because for me, my thinking is like looking at the market, and again, like my experience, truthfully, is like very focused on like tech. So because that's been like the industry that I've worked in. When I think of like what this market has looked like in terms of benefits and people, like let's think about these trends. Like Google introduces like and let's use them as like the obvious example. Like think of all the benefits they introduce for their people, the beanbag chairs and the like incredible food that's available to the staff and the incredible medical like on and on and on and on, kind of like a gold standard. What did we see in the market? Well, for startups to compete with those larger companies, there's a trickle down of those benefits. And they can't introduce all of them, obviously. That's one of the competitive advantages of being Google and being able to attract talent and also being able to pay very large salaries. But it's a part of just this trickle down. It's natural. How do I compete with Google, Facebook, Netflix, etc. when it comes to hiring? I need to incorporate some combination of some of these benefits. I would argue that the career pathing and the talent management that those larger organizations offer and the structure they offer, and they are very structured and they do have good career pathing benefits, that there's going to be a trickle down over time to smaller companies that feel like they need to have this to be able to compete, because I believe it's a benefit that employees are going to demand. I think it's a generational thing as well, with the younger generation coming into the workforce. I think that we've been thinking about this for a long time also, from especially younger workers coming out of a university system where they're used to having guidance in terms of the things that they need to work on and improve on, and then finding themselves in the workplace and it's like a wild west. I just think there are just too many things kind of connecting there that this is going to be really important for all companies to really think about and adopt. And to your point, I think it could become a big part of someone's brand. And it is at companies like Zapier, right? Because they're very open about things like their offboarding program. And it's incredible. I mean, think of how that would make someone feel when they're considering to work at a company like Zapier instead of a company like Google. And a company like Zapier can attract that type of talent, right? Because they have this kind of consideration for their people. These are my beliefs, but
No, I think they're absolutely right. I think what's really interesting is that, I am from that older generation, and for me, you turn up in the morning and you clock in and you do your work and then you clock out. Well, actually, it's my business, so I don't clock out. I'm working all the time. But it's a very big mind shift, and there are so many horror stories that I've seen in my working life, but also I've seen in I don't know if you've seen the Netflix documentary on David Beckham, where he's
I
playing.
haven't actually seen that one yet, but I want
It's
to.
it's well worth a watch.
Okay.
And anyway, he's playing at one of these clubs, and he has a lunch with the guy from LA Galaxy, and then he turns up at training the next day, and the coach says, "You had a lunch with the guy from LA Galaxy. You're not playing anymore for us. You're going to be on the bench for the rest of the season." And
Wow.
it's kind of like, I think for people of my generation, the fear is that if my boss gets wind of the fact that I'm thinking of going somewhere else, that's basically, it's a race for who gets to the door first. Either,
Yeah.
I'm going to walk out the door or he's going to push me out of the door. But it's like, we're both going to be moving in the same direction. And that's incredibly unhealthy, because people
Yeah.
do move on, and you want them to have a good feeling about the company they've worked at when they move on. But also, if you're open about it, I can tell you that the reason that I'm leaving is simply the coffee isn't good enough. Okay, well, we can sort the coffee out if that's the. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? It's like,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
it won't be just the coffee, but you know what I mean. It's like these issues are then addressable. It will be a much worse place if you leave. What can we do to make you stay? But if that comes at the point that you've already got a job offer and double the salary somewhere else that's closer to home, the ship has sailed, hasn't it?
Yeah, and by the way, it's not just I love that analogy, and it's not just for that one individual. I mean, I've been a part of, offboardings at a bunch of companies where I'm already disgruntled, and guess what? Do you think at that moment I'm gonna, you know, give my best, most honest, transparent feedback about what I didn't like about the culture? No. But if there was this level of transparency in the process, would I? Absolutely. Why not? Because to your point, I might feel like they'll actually solve for it. But also, to Rob's point about a brand, now all of a sudden, everywhere I go, I'm going to speak highly of that organization that helped me sort of take the next step in my career. They can take that feedback and choose to incorporate it into their people culture or not. It just makes so much sense. But it's interesting because, yeah, from my perspective too, sometimes I have to be mindful of who I'm speaking to, and almost gun shy of, should I be pushing on ideas like this? This is a pretty big seismic shift for a lot of people to consider, to think about in terms of how to structure. Because you're right, it's just sort of how things have been done for so long. But
But you can't get a little bit pregnant, can you? You've got to set the expectation of where you're going. This is what we're trying to achieve, and actually the change starts now. So
yeah,
when we're hiring people and when we're setting up processes and when we're deciding on a vision for how we're going to execute within this particular division of the organization or this dysfunction within the organization, this is what good looks like. And
yeah,
I think so often people go through, I mean, we see it because we deal a lot with sales departments, and they're trying to put a band-aid on something which is fundamentally broken.
yes,
It's I love jokes as analogies. It's like the guy that's driving through a strange town and he winds the window down and he says, "Can you tell me how to get to Main Street?" And the guy says, "Well, I wouldn't start from here if I were you." And actually, that's where most organizations find themselves, isn't it? They've got these processes that have been built up over years or decades or even generations, and that's just how we do it here.
yeah.
And actually, we need to start in many cases with a completely clean sheet, don't we?
I think so. Yeah, yeah,
So I heard you say the first step is acknowledging that you have a problem. That sounds rather familiar, but we'll move past that. Next, I heard you say that about 70% of the way there is gleaned from publicly available information. It's somewhat the same for everyone.
yeah.
What does that other 30% look like, or what could that other 30% look like? Realizing, of course, that it's going to be customized for each organization, but can you give us still some generalizations about what that might look like for a given company?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of, we were talking about this briefly, but basically truly understanding the nuance of the role is what's, like, I think, so valuable. And when we and so the process would look like, for example, an HR manager has this 70% already defined and visualized. And then they can share that with a subject matter expert within the company. They can share it with the department manager. They could share it potentially with an employee that they sort of want to replicate in terms of skill profile. And you can think of it as almost like a collaborative process where you could share that visualization with them, and then they could edit it by saying, or make suggested changes by saying, hey, these are the things that I think are missing here, or here are some things that you've included that I actually think are not requisite, that are not important. And so it's a very collaborative process. What we found, though, and then pulling the thread on that process, is that a lot of the individuals I just mentioned, the manager, the subject matter expert, the star player, they don't really understand what they're doing. And so creating a highly guided experience for them that is essentially like explaining step by step what they have to do, and also allowing this process to be done asynchronously, are two things that are very valuable. Because typically what this process looks like is someone from HR trying to sit down in a series of painful meetings with a bunch of people, asking them to look at something and on the fly react to it, and then them say, well, I don't know if that's right, or I don't know if that's wrong. And so it doesn't the whole thing becomes more painful than it has to be. And so we've just created a series of workflows and collaboration software that makes that process a lot easier. At least that's what we think makes that process easier. But again, the way to solve for that is it comes down to people and taking time. It's just a matter of, a lot of organizations don't have the know-how, or they don't have the time to do it. And so we help facilitate that with software.
I love that you said the top performers, because my experiences with Fortune 50 organizations, all the way down to startups of a handful, is typically, well, first of all, if it's not already using 100% of the publicly available information, oh, it worked here, it must work there. Even if they do start to customize it, what they'll do is they'll reach out. Do you have any friends or family that want to work here? Well,
Right.
we don't like how you're working here. Why would we want to hire more of you?
So,
Or,
yeah.
You said, let's take a look at some of the top performers. But again, you said these top performers very often don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
It's that, what is that? Unconscious competence. So it's about mapping these
My old
things
drinking
out.
buddy.
Yeah. So we map these things out, and I think this is a critically important step that organizations miss. We teach the hiring managers how to screen for the things that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And this is where I've brought academia into the workplace on more than one occasion. I never knew about this thing called rubrics. They were things my kids brought home for their homework and projects and whatever. And then I started teaching in public schools, and I get, not only do I get it, I love it, but it was locked in academia. I was using this to show my frontline managers, here's an example of what good looks like. Here's what great looks like. Here's something that we want to avoid. And as you're speaking with somebody, simply tick these boxes so that after the fact, you don't have to simply go with your gut. I really liked the way they talked. No, what you really liked was they asked you questions so you could talk. They didn't tick off any of these boxes.
Well, I love that you're talking about rubrics, because another really important piece of this puzzle is how we actually measure and assess people's skill development, or also abstracted, how do we measure and assess the requirements that are sort of, like the architecture piece, or, for example, help someone take that architecture and apply it to For example, like a series of interviewing questions that are relevant. And this is where we've found a really incredible application of generative AI. So one of my co-founders, Dr. Stephen Koslin, 30 plus years at Harvard faculty doing research on the science of learning and sort of what's going on in the brain as we learn things, has developed this really interesting way of using large language models to create simulation training. And it's something that we're really, really excited about in terms of how it fits into this puzzle. Because we can talk about, how do we structure things appropriately, right? Like we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation. We could talk about how do we build career pathing off of it. And the way we think about that is quite simple. I'm an employee now. I can upload my resume. I can parse that for the same skills that were being used by the HR person to determine the relevant competencies and skill structures for the role. And now I can show you, look, here are all the potential career pathways that you might be interested in the company based on the foundational skills that are relevant for you to be in that role. The point isn't to like have someone jump ship into something totally different. The point is that they say, this is what I'm interested in. And now it's transparently there for them and their manager to see. And look, that's also there to spark a conversation. Maybe Jimmy wants to be a manager, but guess what? Like he's got a lot of stuff to work on. And oh, by the way, he's not been doing so great in his current role. That's a great moment for a manager to be empowered to have a conversation about the things that are lacking. Like let's create that moment in time for us to have a transparent conversation around this. But I'm speaking to this because you were talking about the rubric piece. So now let's talk about the competencies themselves, right? There's probably some gap there between the role that you're currently in, the one that you want, in terms of your proficiency in the requisite competency and skill. Well, with a rubric that clearly defines what it means to be novice, proficient, mastery of some sort, we can create simulations that feel hyper realistic based on your job title and based on the industry that you're in. And so Kayvon could have a realistic conversation. Let's say he's a software engineer with his product manager in having to discuss how to actually refine requirements for a new feature. That's a really common scenario that lots of software engineers are probably used to experiencing. And so how can we then analyze that transcript, that interaction, based off that proficiency rubric to say, look, based on the rubric and how you responded, because the AI is going to be the product manager and Kayvon, you'll just be yourself as a software engineer. And we see how you deal with this dynamic scenario. Here's how you performed. Here's where you were lacking. And if you have a learning catalog, here's the course or the coach or the person we recommend you speak with or the thing you should learn in order to improve that. And oh, by the way, that's all transparently available to your manager so that they can see what you're doing through your professional development. So that's like one really targeted example of using a rubric. But you're right, Rob. The same technology could be used, for example, for a manager to do a simulation training to basically talk with a future candidate. And you could even flip it around. There are so many cool things you could do with that, right? How about we flip it around? Manager, I want you to be the applicant. The AI is going to ask you some questions. Which ones were good based on your perception? Which ones were bad? Why were they good? Why were they bad? Like there's such an amazing opportunity, I think, right now with some of these technologies to not just do rote automation or oh yeah, you just click this button and everything's helped, but actual human like augmentation of how we think about these processes and breaking them down and doing a rethink on how we do some of these things. I think there's incredible opportunity out there for that. So you got me started again.
I think I can see it, but I want to get your take on this. Something you said just sparked that. How does the concept of this career architecture support an organization's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts?
I mean, that's been a big part of it since day one too for me. I mean, I think having this transparency in the infrastructure that we're talking about and being able to transparently show all these things is a big part of DE&I, because without it, I mean, and by having sort of an obfuscated process, how can you actually have a true meritocracy in terms of promotion? I mean, because it's just when it's a black box and that person got promoted and that one didn't, I mean, how is that equitable in any sense? I think the point is we're not saying that if you do these things, you get promoted. I think the point is that this is an objective data point. Here are their performance. That's always been a part of the case. But here's also another data point, an objective data point in terms of here are all the things that they were supposed to learn on top of doing their job. Here are all the things they did to learn it. And here are some amazing assessments that they took that they actually had the closest thing possible as doing the job, right? That we could basically create as another data point to then consider them. And then you could stack up those people and say, which one is most fit for the next step in their career at this company. That's sort of the vision for how that process could work.
I loved what you said a little while ago about how you can have these suggestions put in front of you. Here's the course that you need to learn. Here's the coach that we suggest you speak to. And then your manager gets to see that you're doing that. So your manager has said to you, look, Kayvon, you're not performing particularly well in these areas. And then a week later, I can see that you're doing something to address that you've taken the learning things and you've spoken to a coach about this or a counselor or whatever it may be. And that's just incredibly open and helpful to people, isn't it? Both the company and the individual.
Yes. And I think there's a secret sauce here in terms of how do we directionally align the organization's strategic goals with the individual career goals of an employee, right? Like that's where I think there's like a magic type moment to happen. And it's, that's a big problem that we're thinking about actively in terms of how to apply all of these concepts that we're talking about. The three core pillars of what we're doing is career architecture, pathing, assessment. And the vision is how can those things align the strategic objective of the organization and the individual career goals. I think that's where there's something really, really exciting. And I think right now we're doing a really good job at the individual level of the manager and the employee. But I think there's more that we can do that gets really exciting. So,
yeah, because I guess that the objectives of the organization are profit, shareholder value, shareholder dividends. And actually, and me making you a happy employee does not help me deliver. Me whipping you harder so that you end up selling more stuff drives profit. And actually, if we can break that connection, so that organizations see that happy employees that are smiling more perform better. And if they stay longer in the organization because they're not constantly looking to jump ship before they get fired, then they are productive within the organization for a longer proportion of their total employment time. And I think that tying those things together is crucial for organizations to see that they've been copying the wrong homework for 2 decades.
Yes, I love that. Perfect.
What are the things that AI cannot help with in this process?
Well, I think it's really there's so many things, just to be totally clear. And this is like another topic that you'll get me going on, but there's so I want to like make this cogent for your audience, but I also like there are so many things streaming in my head. I'll say like a smattering of things. One, I think it's incredibly important in terms of how we think of the UI and like the UX of these products in being incredibly clear when there's a moment of generative AI in use. And I think a lot of people think, well, it'd be obvious if I'm talking to a chatbot. Well, I think some of the more powerful applications of generative AI are when they're much more subtle. So when I'm looking at a definition of a skill on our platform, we actually used a workflow where we took the data from Wikipedia on the definition of that skill and then used generative AI to create a more comprehensive description of it. Now, that's like one very small feature of what our product does or how it represents that information. But I think it's really important that we make it clear to someone that this was created through generative AI for a variety of reasons. So that's one thing. I think AI's limitation is that, as we know, there's a level of hallucination, there's a level of discrepancy in what the output is. And so we need to be like really apparent, and therefore we need to be apparent to the end user about like when we're using generative AI. So that's like one of the things that I think is a big limitation. I think another big limitation is that uh, we shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that just because an AI makes a recommendation, that's necessarily the end all be all, and we stop there. For all of the things that we're talking about, especially for something like assessment, because assessment is so important, in my opinion, you know, you don't want the end result to just be completely produced by a machine. You want the end result to help a human make a more informed decision around some of these things. So it becomes a data point in the conversation. It doesn't become the conversation. So I think that's a major limitation that we should be careful about. And I think that's really important. Another really important thing is when we think of the ethics of like AI and applications. So it's been proven if you give artificial intelligence or I forget if it was ChatGPT in particular, but if you give a large language model a name or a gender and a role and tell it like what this person should earn, it can be different if you give it a name of a particular ethnic background or you tell it that you're female in a STEM field. Or there are lots of more specific examples and I'm kind of botching it. But so for us, it becomes really important then that we're not feeding that information into the large language model's consideration as far as how it's producing either the assessment, but also a result and an analysis on that assessment. And so, there are lots of things that we've uncovered in this process, not only from reading information, but also from building, which is like, I think really critical. If we're going to get an understanding of the limitations of this technology, then we need to be promoting people to start building with it, tinkering with it. And that's how I learn best. So that's a snapshot. There's more.
Awesome. Kayvon, so many more questions, so much more that we could talk about. This has been a fascinating discussion, but we're coming up to the end. So tell us, how can people learn more and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, go check out our LinkedIn page, zal.ai, zal.ai. You can also go to our website. It's the same URL. And also feel free to reach out to me, connect with me. The thing that gets me really excited about this company and the community that's available here is it's not just the learning and development or HR folks who are commonly thought of as sort of the stewards of a lot of the work that we're talking about. This is work that affects almost everyone in the workforce, right? So if you're an employee that's been frustrated by this process, if you're a manager that's been frustrated about professional development and upskilling their team, I would love to talk to you. I think it really energizes me to hear from these individuals because that's honestly one of the big things that keeps us going and keeps us excited about what we're doing, because we get to think and feel the impact that it can have in the workplace. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'm an open book and I love talking to people. So yeah.
Excellent. If you have something to say, we want to hear from you. You can scan the QR code on screen or visit us at digitaldownload.live and fill out the Be Our Guest application form. On behalf of the panelists, to our guest Kayvon, to our audience, thank you all for being a part of the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live. Until next time, thank you all for being a part of today's show.